Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. As we get into chapter 40 of the book of Isaiah, we get into what many consider the second part of Isaiah. And it is pretty clear that Isaiah can be divided into two parts because in the first section, chapters 1 through 39, you have many prophecies about the judgments that God was going to render against the various nations. Whereas in chapter 40 and onward, we're going to see words of comfort, more encouraging passages. We're going to see an increase in the messianic prophecies, things that the exiles could read and really be encouraged and comforted. As a matter of fact, the very first verse of this section in chapter 40 and verse 1 says, "Comfort, O comfort my people, says your God." And that definitely becomes the theme that runs through the rest of the book of Isaiah. As we look at chapter 40, it is a very encouraging chapter. In saying, "Comfort, O comfort my people," Isaiah gives some real reasons of why we should be comforted, or how we can be comforted. And all of it ties to the greatness of the God we serve. And think about that. Whenever you're in a situation in life where you're discouraged, you're despondent, you're just kind of feeling down, and you need some comfort and you need some encouragement, one of the best things you can do is turn your attention towards God. Turn your eyes upward and think about the greatness of God. And you can see God is the one who's reigning supremely over your life. And when we put God in the proper perspective and when we focus on Him and He becomes our heart's desire, it does comfort us. It does comfort our hearts. And so there's several different ways in which Isaiah describes the greatness of God in chapter 40. For one, he talks about the greatness of God's wisdom. In verse 13 it says, "Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord, or as his counselor has informed him? With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding? And who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding?" And of course, those are rhetorical questions. The obvious answer is no one did. He is the one who has had wisdom through eternity past, and He's a God who is the very source of wisdom. And that should bring us comfort because it shows us that there is a God who is in control and He knows what He's doing. He has the wisdom to bring out the best results in our lives. He has the wisdom to cause all things to work together for good for those who love Him, Romans chapter 8. And so that ought to bring us comfort. But it also ought to give us comfort as well when we think about the fact that He is God over the nations. As we think about world events, even today, there are a lot of things going on that might cause some anxiety, may cause some fear, might cause people to kind of wonder what the future holds. We can be comforted in knowing that we have a God who is greater than all the nations. It says in verse 15, "Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are regarded as a speck of dust on the scales." So the nations are like nothing before Him, like a little drop in the bucket, that doesn't really do anything, can't really cause any problems, it can be easily manipulated. That's how the nations are before God. And then the speck of dust on the scales, a speck of dust is not going to move the scales, not going to totter the scales in either direction. It's just a speck of dust. And that's what God considers the nations that are before Him. They are like nothing. And so we serve an awesome and mighty and powerful God who's in control of world events. Nothing that we think is overwhelming or too great is too great for our God. He is high above all the nations, no matter how powerful they are. We can also take comfort in the fact that He's greater than other gods. He says in verse 18, "To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness will you compare with Him? As for the idol of Christ, a craftsman cast it, a goldsmith plates it with gold, and a silversmith fashions chains of silver." He who is too impoverished for such an offering selects a tree that does not rot. He seeks out for himself a skillful craftsman to prepare an idol that will not totter. So this would bring a lot of comfort to the exiles as they consider all these other nations that were so powerful that in their eyes perhaps may have caused fear in the gods that they were serving. But here Isaiah is basically saying, none of those gods can even compare to the God that we serve. And that ought to bring comfort to us today as well. We serve the best. We serve the true and living God. And there is no other God besides him. He is high above all other gods. And that should help us in recognizing the fact that he is the one that can be prayed to, who will act, who will listen, who does see. And he's not a God made out of wood or gold or any other type of earthly material. But he is a God that reigns above this physical world and is in control of all things. But he also goes on to talk about how he's greater than rulers. He says in verse 23, He it is who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Scarcely have they been planted, scarcely have they been sown, scarcely has their stock taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them and they wither, and the storm carries them away like stubble. So God is above all the rulers that we know of in this world and that have ever existed. As we look at the news and other places and we read about these rulers of other nations that seem so powerful and so intimidating, we can think about our God, who really can reduce them to nothing at whenever he decides. He can basically blow on them and they will wither like grass under the heat of the sun. And so our God is high above the rulers of this world. But then we can also see him as great as the great creator. In verse 26 it says, Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these stars, the one who leads forth their hosts by number. He calls them all by name. Because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one of them is missing. One of the things that really just make me stand in awe of God is when I go out on a starry night and I look up in the stars and I think about how vast this universe is. And to think about how God created each and every one of those stars. And here Isaiah tells us that he calls them by name and he leads them forth by their number. It's just amazing to me that we would serve a God that is so powerful, especially when you think about how great these stars actually are. Our sun is basically, it is a star, but it's just kind of an average star. There are stars out there that make our sun look like nothing. And God is in control of them all. And so God, the one who created the vast universe, is the God that we serve and the God that loves us and the God that we have a relationship with. So that ought to bring us a lot of comfort. But we also serve a God who doesn't ignore our situations. In verse 27 it says, Why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord, and the justice due me escapes the notice of my God? And we could probably think about this very easily, how the exiles, those from Jerusalem and Judah, when they were in Babylonian captivity, might think, well, maybe God has forgotten about us. Maybe God doesn't know what we're going through. But here Isaiah is saying, how can you say that? How can you say that what you're going through is hidden from the Lord? And sometimes we might feel like God doesn't really know what we're going through. Maybe because we pray and we pray and we pray, and it doesn't seem like God's answering our prayers, that we might begin to think maybe our way is hidden from the Lord. But the same answer that Isaiah gives to the exiles is the same answer that we can receive as well. Verse 28, Do you not know? Have you not heard? The everlasting God, the Lord, The Creator of the ends of the earth does not become weary or tired. His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might he increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. So what does this mean? It means that maybe in the situation with the exiles, it might look like God was not seeing what they were going through, that maybe their way was hidden. But God is a bestower of strength. Even when He doesn't fix our situation, even if we, like them, that you have to be in 70 years of exile, it doesn't mean that God isn't watching you, and it doesn't mean that God isn't strengthening you and helping you through it. It says that He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power. So it might be that your situation is that you've been praying and praying over a particular situation that has been weighing on you, and maybe it seems like God hasn't been listening because the problem hasn't found resolution yet. But what you might be ignoring is that inner strength that God has been giving you to make it day by day. And maybe in some cases, step by step or breath by breath. It may not be an overwhelmingly sense of strength and might, but it's just enough to get you through the day. And God is there just supplying you with enough strength to bring you through. And when you get to the other side of the situation, whatever you're in, you'll be able to look back and say, wow, how did I ever get through that? And of course, the answer to that would be that we serve a God who gives strength to the weary, and that those who wait for the Lord gain new strength. They mount up with wings like eagles. They are able to overcome insurmountable difficulties, not because the difficulties just go away, but because God gives them the strength to make it through the difficulties. And maybe sometimes that's even the greater blessing. So these are just some things to think about. Hopefully, as we think about this and meditate on this today, it'll bring comfort to our hearts to think about a God who is great in wisdom, that's great over the nations, greater than other gods, greater than the rulers of this earth, a God who is the great creator, and a God who not only knows what we're going through, but gives us strength through what we're going through. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. I thank you guys for listening in today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.